Chapter 1, Introduction. Have you ever loved someone so deeply that reason couldn't bind the heart? That's what love is. It can make people shine brightly under the sun, and it can also make them bury their pain deep in the abyss. Before meeting Phoebe Hayes, Edward Smith had his own dreams and ideals. After meeting her, his dreams and ideals were all realized for her. Phoebe Hayes, she had Edward Smith's love. For her, at the last minute, he changed his long-held dreams. In her passionate, daring youth, Phoebe Hayes didn't really know Edward Smith, their interactions limited to fleeting glances and a few exchanged words. On the day she broke up with Oliver Bennett, lost and adrift, his words offered her an escape, a lifeline. Impulsive youth, once critically stimulated, doesn't consider the consequences. 7 days living with him wasn't enough to stir her heart, but she didn't know that her actions had unintentionally given him hope. He was mistaken. When she regained her composure after the impulsive moment, she fled. Was she running from the pain of Oliver Bennett or from Edward's love? She changed jobs often, traveled extensively, and made many friends. She just didn't know that he had also been to the places she visited, though their paths never crossed. After a long journey, Phoebe Hayes finally understood who her heart beat for, who caused her pain. She decided to return home for him, wanting to entrust her future to him, but she forgot that there was still someone named Oliver Bennett between them. Oliver Bennett was a forbidden name, the biggest regret of her youth. Fortunately, it was only regret, not a bond. Underscore 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 underscore. Before each live broadcast, Edward Smith had the habit of being quiet and alone for a while. When he reached the end of the hallway and stood before the floor-to-ceiling window, he discovered dusk had fallen, and cold rain was falling outside. In Edinburgh, in February, the weather was as cold as in Beijing, but the days were shorter. It was currently just past 4 p.m. He watched the rain, slowly closing his eyes, as if feeling the damp cold penetrate the windowpane and rush against his face. He knew it was an illusion. He was currently standing in a 5-star hotel in Edinburgh, very close to the International Conference Centre. The television station had rented several rooms here for the live broadcast of the Global Climate Conference. Therefore, inside this luxurious yet elegant hotel, the temperature was warm, like basking under the bright May sunshine. Lately, he'd been experiencing these illusions. While reading, driving, or walking, he would suddenly hear a sweet, clear voice calling out. An image would instantly appear in his mind, a face with the corners of the mouth slightly upturned, dimples by the lips, eyes curved into crescents, head tilted slightly, smiling softly. He would look around, searching, and in the end, always let out a self-deprecating chuckle. Edward, someone patted him lightly on the shoulder. He turned around to see director Ethan Rivers, also his close friend. "Has Dr. Dillon arrived?" he asked. Ethan Rivers shook his head. "Just got off the phone with his assistant, he's on his way." "Edward, there's something else I need to tell you." He clicked his tongue, his brow furrowed, as if hesitant to speak. Edward Smith possessed a uniquely calm demeanor, maintaining composure and serenity in any situation, a crucial trait for a news editor. However, Ethan wasn't sure if Edward's handsome face could retain its tranquility after hearing this news. "What is it?" Edward Smith inquired with a smile, betraying no hint of curiosity. Ethan Rivers hesitated, pulling a piece of paper from his pocket. "I just found out. She's in Edinburgh." "Who?" Edward Smith silently wondered, a jolt of electricity coursing through him, his mind momentarily blank, his heart pounding. He loosened his tie, blinking hard. "Impossible. She's in New Zealand." He'd overheard this news at a class reunion 4 years prior, from her best friend, Lily Harper. People had asked Lily why she hadn't come. Lily, like a grieving widow, had sighed, saying, "What are friends for?" She went to New Zealand without a word. We chatted briefly on QQ, then she vanished. Others had remarked, "Why endure hardship in New Zealand? With her qualifications, she could easily get into provincial television." Lily had scoffed, "She has high standards. Her dream is CCTV." Everyone had then glanced at him. He had just joined CCTV as a field reporter for the news channel. Ethan Rivers frowned. "She left New Zealand last year. She's a tour guide at a travel agency." During Lunar New Year, Little Lawrence's group was in Edinburgh, and she was their guide. Little Lawrence was Ethan Rivers' wife, a customer service manager at Beijing Global Travel, handling European and American tours. A tour guide? Something within Edward Smith crumbled. Ethan Rivers shrugged. "I was speechless when I heard it. Here's her address. After the interview, if you're free, go see her." He pressed the paper into Edward Smith's hand, noticing a slight tremor in his fingers. Concerned, he asked, "Are you all right?" Edward Smith looked up, his face instantly composed. "Of course. I'm fine." At the elevator doors, the group headed towards the studio. Ethan Rivers said, "Oh, Dr. Dillon has arrived. Let's go back. This is Anna Carson's first live broadcast, you should guide her a bit." Edward Smith nodded, approaching Dr. Dillon and exchanging fluent English about the special circumstances and topics of the live broadcast. Dr. Dillon, a frequent guest on television, understood the situation well, giving Edward Smith a reassuring, "Okay," gesture. Edward Smith smiled, turning to see Anna Carson standing outside the studio, her hand trembling as she held the script. He smiled gently. "Little Carson, just follow the script. For any technical terms, transitions, or if you need any assistance, leave it to me." Anna Carson had joined the international channel late last year. A graduate of the University of Liverpool, her beauty, talent, and privileged background made her highly regarded at the station. Those who joined with her were now either working as production assistants or field reporters, while she had been on air from the start. "I'm afraid I'll misspeak due to nerves. This program has so much technical jargon." Anna Carson, perfectly made up, wore a stiff expression, unable to manage a smile. "The topic today is a bit serious and heavy. If you misspeak, it'll just lighten the mood. Don't worry, I've got your back." Anna Carson took a deep breath and looked at Edward Smith sheepishly. "Editor Smith, how can you speak English so fluently? It makes me, who's been in England for 4 years, feel inadequate." Edward Smith chuckled. "I worked at a bar in Sanlitun for 3 years. There were a lot of foreigners there, a good environment to learn a language." Anna Carson widened her beautiful eyes. "Ah, then your alcohol tolerance must be pretty high." "I worked there, I didn't go there to drink. My tolerance is actually quite ordinary." Anna Carson was surprised. Edward Smith, just over 30, was already a key editor at the station, so she assumed he, like her, had a powerful family background. This society values ability, but to achieve success at a young age, one usually needs family background and support. "Are you two ready?" The assistant director approached to help them adjust their headsets. Edward Smith nodded and entered the studio with Anna Carson. Ethan Rivers waited for the three of them to settle in, checked the lighting, and called out, "Everyone in place, cameras ready, 5, 4, 3, 2. Good evening, viewers. This is a live broadcast from Edinburgh. Today, we are honored to have with us world-renowned meteorologist Dr. Dillon. He will explore with us the changes in the global climate and the preventative measures taken by various countries." Edward Smith's deep, resonant voice rang out, and Ethan Rivers finally breathed a sigh of relief. The assistant director nudged him. He looked up at the assistant, who held out a piece of paper with the words, "Editor Smith's right hand is clenched tight." It's very strange. Ethan Rivers looked again. Under the soft lighting, Edward Smith chatted, his left hand holding the program script, but his right hand tightly gripping a small piece of paper, looking a bit unnatural. He sighed. She really had a significant impact on Edward, even a simple address was treated like a treasure. Anna Carson was initially stiff and awkward, but as the conversation progressed, she relaxed, her words becoming lively and engaging. This interview was originally meant to be hosted solely by Edward Smith, but to give her a chance to practice and add some vibrancy to the program, she was included. Ethan Rivers was satisfied with her performance. Live broadcast time always flies by. The 1-hour interview was over. Edward Smith faced the camera with a gentle smile. This concludes our interview. We sincerely thank Dr. Dillon for joining us. Applause erupted. Ethan Rivers went to see Dr. Dillon off. Edward Smith removed his headset and went into the restroom to splash cold water on his face. Looking up at himself in the mirror, he loosened his tie, then tightened it, then loosened it again. He hadn't been this flustered in a long time, not even during his Broadcasting Academy entrance exam. What was he so nervous about? He chuckled self-deprecatingly and tightened his tie. When he came out, Anna Carson was waiting outside, her makeup still on, seemingly waiting for him on purpose. You did very well today. He encouraged her with a smile. Luckily, I had you. Listening to you, I certainly couldn't be nervous. Thank you, Editor Smith. Anna Carson said sincerely. We're colleagues, just call me Edward Smith. He turned and walked into the dressing room to get his coat. Smith. Edward Smith. Anna Carson followed. I know a great Italian restaurant in Edinburgh, let's try it. Edward Smith stopped, I still have some work to do. You should go with another colleague. After saying that, he hurried out. Anna Carson stood there awkwardly, her hands slowly dropping. The twilight sky, seen through the heavy rain, obscured the intersection across the street, the air was damp and cold. Edward Smith got into a taxi and handed the driver the paper he was holding, go to this address. The driver turned around, looked him over a few times, and shrugged. Edward Smith closed his eyes, wondering if the driver in front could hear his heart pounding. Someone who disappeared for 6 or 7 years suddenly appeared close by, how could he not be agitated? How could he not be afraid? 6 years ago, when she left, she didn't even say goodbye. But the world is round, after a long journey, one day there will still be a reunion, like him and her. A happy smile appeared on his handsome face. Due to the Global Climate Conference, the roads in Edinburgh were more crowded than usual, coupled with the heavy rain, the taxi moved very slowly. Half an hour later, the car turned into a messy intersection, with occasional Victorian buildings appearing outside the window. Sir, we've arrived. The car stopped in front of a 6-story building. Edward Smith paid and just pushed the door open to get out when a figure suddenly ran out from the building's lobby, one hand pulling luggage, the other frantically waving at a taxi. He instinctively looked up, a black knee-length coat, a gray beanie with 2 ear flaps, and a scarf of the same color covering her face, revealing only her eyes. How did the taxi get here so fast? I'm so lucky today. She stood by the car door, happily muttering to herself. A proper Oxford accent, sweet and clear, her eyes curved into crescents. His heart trembled violently, he blinked hard, looking again in disbelief. The luggage was heavy, and she didn't want to put it in the trunk, so she struggled to get it into the back seat. He stepped forward to help her. Thank you, handsome. She smiled at him, winked, and with a bang, closed the car door. The taxi started up and sped away, splashing water onto the sidewalk. He stood dumbfounded, his hair soaked and messy, his eyes unfocused. Was it another hallucination? He seemed to have seen her. Was it really her? If it was, how could she not greet him? He didn't know how long he had been standing there when an umbrella appeared above his head. Sir, do you need any help? He wiped the rainwater off his face and stood before the building manager. Excuse me, does Miss Phoebe Hayes live here? He asked hoarsely. She used to live here, but she just moved out today. He pursed his lips, looking out at the misty intersection. Then, do you know where she moved to? She said she wanted to get married, not sure which city she's moving to, but definitely not coming back here. Ah, she was just here a few minutes ago. You're so unlucky. The manager gave him a sympathetic look, seeing his tired and miserable face. Should I call a cab for you? He waved his hand in refusal, looking up at the building in the rain. What floor did she live on? How had she been these past few years? Why did she quit being a radio host to become a tour guide? No one answered him, but the answers didn't really matter anymore. It really was her. 6 years, and her face hadn't changed much. The only thing that had changed was that she didn't remember him. Now, there was someone else by her side, someone she loved. To her, he was just a fleeting passerby in her life. Bitterly, he lowered his gaze, crumpling the paper in his hand into a small ball and tossing it into a nearby trash can. He believed that after this chance encounter, no matter how round the earth was, they were unlikely to meet again. Job interviews are a real test of nerves. Phoebe Hayes took another deep breath, pretending not to hear the two girls next to her commenting about her. Before leaving, she had put on makeup, mascara, blush, and lip gloss, checking herself in the mirror repeatedly, admiring her own intelligence before smiling and grabbing her coat. Cosmetics are a woman's best friend, but even the best cosmetics won't lie. This was an interview for the host position of the Chengdu radio station's love program, Late Night Whispers, not a beauty pageant, yet every girl here was more beautiful and graceful than the last. Among this group of young, beautiful women, she, at 27, felt incredibly self-conscious. Tragically, she was wearing the same outfit as another girl there. When choosing her clothes, she had thought to dress formally to make a good impression. The light purple cashmere suit, with its small collar and A-line skirt, allowed for easy movement without being too stiff. It was one of 2 outfits she had bought at the Xidan shopping mall 2 days after returning to Beijing. The lobby was warm. And after registering, she took off her coat. Just as she entered the hallway, she heard a shriek. Startled, she looked up and saw another girl wearing the exact same dress. The girl glared at her, furious and on the verge of tears. The other waiting interviewees displayed a mixture of schadenfreude, indignation, and mockery. Phoebe Hayes felt utterly helpless. On her, the dress looked demure, on the other girl, elegant and refined. The age difference was apparent. She wanted to rip the dress off right then and there, but what would she wear underneath? She forced herself to sit down, pretending not to notice that she had become a thorn in the other girl's side. Fortunately, she didn't have to wait long. A man in a suit soon led her into a seriously formal office. Formal? Yes, the room was decorated in black and white, and even the woman sitting behind the desk wore a black suit. In front of her were a few resumes. Seeing her enter, she gestured towards the sofa. Please, sit. Her voice was icy. Phoebe Hayes sat down politely, her eyes quickly scanning the nameplate on the desk as she lowered herself. Linda Thompson, head of HR, you graduated from Beijing Communication University. Linda Thompson didn't look up, glancing at her sideways with a voice laced with skepticism. I brought the original diploma. Need to verify it? Phoebe Hayes asked, a slight smile playing on her lips. Did graduating from that academy mean everyone grew 2 extra inches on their heads? Linda Thompson didn't smile, her brows slowly furrowing. Plastic surgery? No. Remarkable transformation. Linda Thompson assessed her again, still seemingly disbelieving, but unconcerned. I've reviewed your resume. Graduated 6 years ago, then went abroad, worked as a bank clerk, and also as a tour guide. Why did you go abroad? And why did you return? Graduating from Communication University had always been prestigious, opening doors to CCTV and other broadcasting stations. Yet, Phoebe Hayes went abroad to study finance. This question hit a nerve. But she maintained a humorous facade. Because I'm patriotic. I went abroad to experience life, to one day contribute to my country. Now I'm back to fulfill my dream. Linda Thompson's eyes widened, nearly choking. And you think this radio station can help your dream take flight? Phoebe Hayes actually nodded. A 7-year-old girl talking about dreams is adorable. A 17-year-old girl talking about dreams is ambitious. A 27-year-old woman talking about dreams, isn't that naive? Linda Thompson arched a brow coldly. 3 black lines appeared on Phoebe Hayes' forehead. Isn't being naive good? Naive people are at least sincere, uncorrupted, and genuine. In a relationship program, besides voice and intellect, a host needs sincerity to connect with listeners and encourage them to open up. Manager Thompson. The doors suddenly swung open, interrupting Phoebe Hayes. She turned to see a tall, bespectacled man with a refined air standing at the doorway. Interview in progress. He stepped inside. Linda Thompson rose. Just 3 more candidates. He nodded, picking up Phoebe Hayes' resume. All right, carry on then. After the interviews, I'll come to your office. The man looked deeply into Phoebe Hayes' eyes before leaving. Phoebe Hayes noticed he wasn't young, with streaks of gray at his temples. Don't stare. He's taken. Linda Thompson, seeing Phoebe Hayes still looking at the door, coughed pointedly. Phoebe Hayes teased, can't help it. He's quite distinguished. Linda Thompson froze for a few seconds, her face slowly flushing crimson. That's my husband, she snapped. Ah. Phoebe Hayes shrugged. So, she's married. She felt a pang of sympathy for the woman before her. Holding on to such a refined husband must be stressful. Manager Thompson, shall we continue? Do you even think this position is right for you? Linda Thompson's voice lost its composure, rising to a sharp, piercing volume. If I didn't have any confidence, why would I be here? Phoebe Hayes's clear eyes suddenly brightened, her whole face animating. I have professional training, some experience, haven't even reversed the time zones yet, will adapt to night work, and what's more, I'm genuinely naive. Although the final decision rests with you, I've given it my all. Whatever the outcome, I won't regret it. With that, she nodded to Linda Thompson. Turning towards the door, she bit her lower lip hard. Seeing Linda Thompson's livid face, she thought this interview was definitely a bust. As another girl entered, she glanced back at the closed door, smirked, grabbed her coat, and walked out to the main lobby. Miss Hayes. The door at the end of the hallway opened. It was the man with the silvering temples who had called her earlier. She stopped. Director Lawrence, you have a phone call, a voice called from inside the room. I'll be right over. He didn't turn around, but smiled at Phoebe Hayes. Director Lawrence. Radio Director David Lawrence. Phoebe Hayes drew a sharp, silent breath. David Lawrence glanced at his wrist. It's almost lunchtime. Let me show Miss Hayes around our station cafeteria. Is this part of the interview? Phoebe Hayes's heart pounded, her hands clenched nervously. Was she chosen? David Lawrence laughed heartily. No, it's because there's no smog in Beijing today. The weather is beautiful. The weather was indeed lovely, a light drizzle falling persistently since midnight. Can I consider this a perk of being a station employee? She asked cautiously. Miss Hayes is very clever, but being a station employee isn't as glamorous as you might think. Come this way. David Lawrence walked on the outer side, maintaining an arm's-length distance from Phoebe Hayes. The cafeteria was in the building's basement. As they exited the elevator, the heavy smell of cooking oil hit them. They were a bit early, the cafeteria was still empty. The menu here is quite extensive. We also have Western-style breakfast items, whatever you prefer. David Lawrence handed Phoebe Hayes a tray and smiled warmly at the chef behind the counter. "I'll have combo B, please." Phoebe Hayes also chose combo B, the same lunch as him. In this city, there are about 24 active radio stations. Some of the late-night talk shows, like Gentle Night, Whispers of the City, Everyday Love, and Night Stars, are quite successful. Our station is lagging behind at the moment. Regardless of the topic, whether it's market economics or interpersonal relationships, listener engagement is low. I've been doing a lot of research, and I feel what we need is a talented host. Miss Hayes, you have a great voice, life experience, and professional training. Perhaps you can attract listeners. I really hope you can change the current situation. David Lawrence, the general manager, ate with the same refined manners as his demeanor, spooning rice delicately into his mouth and sipping soup silently. Dining with such a man, Phoebe Hayes found herself agreeing even more with Linda Thompson, the department head. Phoebe Hayes swallowed a mouthful of soup with difficulty. "Director Lawrence, frankly speaking, I haven't worked as a broadcaster since graduating, let alone hosted a show. I'm only here today to try my luck, I'm not confident at all. Regarding relationship topics, I might disappoint you." In love, she was a defeated soldier. What qualifications did she have to guide others? Her earlier confident words to Linda Thompson were just bravado. "This program is a two-person show, you'll have a relationship expert working with you. Miss Hayes, your voice is captivating, and, I have faith in Beijing Communication University graduates. Miss Hayes, you seem familiar." If David Lawrence were 10 years younger, and if she were stunningly beautiful, she might have interpreted his question as a subtle flirtation. Looking at David Lawrence's kindly, paternal expression, she severely scorned her own inappropriate thoughts and answered honestly, "I started at Beijing Communication University in 2000 and graduated in 2004 before going to New Zealand. I probably have a very common face. Quite a few 2004 graduates have become well known, Edward Smith, Mandy Hope, and..." David Lawrence noticed Phoebe Hayes' sudden silence and flustered gaze, so he paused. He still felt she was familiar, but couldn't quite place her. After the meal, he took her to see the next floor, where Whispers of the Night was set up in Studio 8. Phoebe Hayes caressed the microphone, speakers, soundproof glass, and sighed softly, a long-forgotten feeling welling up inside her. "Come to the station tomorrow to complete the HR paperwork. Can you start the day after?" David Lawrence asked. "Yes." David Lawrence, busy with work, left first, having his secretary escort her downstairs. In the elevator, they encountered Linda Thompson. Phoebe smiled a greeting, but Linda Thompson just sniffed coldly and lifted her chin dismissively. Phoebe Hayes didn't mind, she guessed her hiring was definitely due to David Lawrence. The rain hadn't stopped, mirroring the day she left Edinburgh. She used her bag to cover her head, running across the street to hail a cab. Chengdu Broadcasting was not far from her apartment, only a 5-minute bus ride. When she saw the job posting on TV, she had jumped up in excitement. A taxi stopped in front of her. "Miss, where are you going?" the driver asked, turning around. She wiped her face with a handkerchief. "Beijing Communication University, thank you." Chapter 2, Miss Braces. The curtains were tightly drawn, the room as dark as midnight. Phoebe Hayes lay in bed, eyes open, staring at the ceiling, momentarily disoriented, unsure of where she was. Slam! A loud door slam echoed from outside. Phoebe Hayes slowly propped herself up, knowing without looking at the clock that it must be 4 p.m. She hadn't lived in this apartment for a month yet. But whenever she was home, the man next door always went out at this time. They had never met face to face, but her intuition told her it was a man, and a single one at that. The other day, she exited the elevator and noticed wet footprints larger than a size 14 outside. Her intuition was spot on. No matter how tall a woman is, her feet wouldn't be that big. His schedule was fixed, out at 4 p.m., back between 10 and 11 p.m. He had no visitors, brought no one home, and was quiet inside. Sometimes, faint music drifted from his door. Oddly, he enjoyed folk music, specifically mountain folk music, sometimes soaring, sometimes soft and fluid, always intensely emotional. Phoebe Hayes was intrigued, wondering about his profession. Writer? IT guy? Artisan? She leaned towards IT. Writers and artisans wouldn't have such personalities or be so punctual. Yawning, she pulled back the curtains. The sun had lost its glare, the sky pale and dreary. Today was Phoebe Hayes' first day of work. Her radio shift started before 11 a.m., about 7 hours from now, but she was up early. Yesterday, during onboarding at the radio station, Linda Thompson called her in and explained she was on probation, not officially hired. A contract would be offered in 3 months, contingent on positive listener feedback. She understood the rules: there's no free lunch. Some radio shows were pre-recorded and replayed, and there were writers and idea generators. But emotional advice shows required live interaction and couldn't be pre-recorded. Callers' questions were unpredictable, demanding skill from the host. Phoebe Hayes felt the pressure, but it made the challenge exciting. Success meant her name could rise with the show's popularity. This had always been Phoebe Hayes' goal, except back then, she envisioned herself under bright stage lights. Her stomach rumbled. The refrigerator was bare. Job hunting had meant eating out for every meal, leaving no time for groceries. She quickly washed her face, threw on a jacket, and headed to the supermarket downstairs. The building was convenient, with a supermarket, cafes, restaurants, and even a romantic Italian bar for leisure. The supermarket checkout lines were long, cashiers too busy to look up. Phoebe Hayes pushed her cart towards the frozen food aisle, grabbing favorites like frozen dumplings and fried rice. She was embarrassed to admit she never learned to cook. Abroad, she lacked the means. Unaccustomed to Western food, frozen meals kept her fed. Her foreign friends marveled at her ability to eat them for years without getting tired. She sighed, it wasn't a choice. Ironically, back home, it still wasn't a choice. Her work schedule would be flipped, arriving home in the wee hours. Who had the energy to cook then? Sleep was more important. At the fruit stand, large, vibrant Fuji apples and freshly delivered strawberries beckoned. Housewives gathered, lamenting the high prices. Phoebe Hayes, finding them cheap, quickly picked a dozen apples and a pack of strawberries. These items, priced in euros abroad, were so much cheaper in yuan. And so fresh. Her spirits high, she smiled and pushed her cart, strolling along. Oh, excuse me. Her cart wobbled, bumping into another. Phoebe Hayes quickly apologized. Ah. The girl pushing the cart reacted as if she'd seen an alien, eyes wide, scream piercing. Everyone looked over. Phoebe Hayes rushed forward to cover the girl's mouth, laughing apologetically to the onlookers. She gets like this whenever she's excited. Hey, Lily Harper, why are you biting me? She pulled her hand back, 2 rows of teeth marks clearly visible on her palm. Does it hurt? Lily Harper glared coldly, arms crossed, assessing the person who had vanished for 6 years from head to toe. A girl changes at 18, the apple-round face had become oval, quite beautiful. Phoebe Hayes rubbed her hand, glancing at Lily Harper. Let me bite you and see. Lily Harper looked at her, righteous indignation in her voice, loud as firecrackers. That's letting you off easy. You went abroad without a word, came back without a peep. Are we enemies? We were comrades in arms, roommates for 4 years. You dare treat me like this? What, did you snag some rich guy, hit it big, and are afraid I'll stick to you like a leech. Let me tell you, this lady is proud and free, I'd rather be a broken jade than a whole tile. Phoebe Hayes was between laughter and tears. You can say anything. All right, Lady Harper, I'm wrong, it's all my fault. During their 4 years of university, she and Lily Harper were arguably the closest friends in their class. When they first entered Beijing Communication University, she was having her teeth fixed and had to wear braces. Lily Harper, upon seeing her, laughed and gave her the nickname Miss Braces. After that, no one called her Phoebe Hayes anymore, everyone called her Miss Braces. Even the teachers, when calling on her, would say, Miss Braces, please answer. She truly wanted to cry but couldn't. Lily Harper was sensitive to cold and suffered from menstrual cramps. Every month, for those few days, she had to share a bed with her. In their second year, Lily Harper had a crush on an English lecturer at the university, and she helped Lily Harper deliver a love letter. The lecturer politely invited them to dinner, and they happily went, only to find a beautiful woman waiting. The lecturer calmly introduced her as his fiancée. Lily Harper was so embarrassed she wanted to die. One evening, they drank until they were tipsy, lying on the grass, gazing at the stars. Lily Harper nudged her, Miss Braces, our friendship must last forever. Let's see, when I get married, you'll be my bridesmaid. When you get married, I'll be your. Hey, can married people be bridesmaids? How do you know I'll definitely get married after you? She retorted coolly. I'm 3 years older than you. So what if you're older? You don't even have a boyfriend. Is having a boyfriend so great? Humph, your Oliver Bennett is the career-focused type, catching him will be difficult. Prophetic words. She and Oliver Bennett, on the eve of graduation, faced a dramatic turn of events. Since then, she's been in the Western Hemisphere, and he's been with another girl in the Eastern Hemisphere. Not sincere enough. Lily Harper's chin tilted upwards, not softening at all. So how do you want to punish me? She lowered her head in resignation. Lily Harper glanced at her, a sly smile playing on her lips. Let's see. She took her mobile phone out of her bag, her fingertips flying across the screen. What's up? Phoebe Hayes peered over. Just caught Miss Braces, when's the trial? Before she could collect herself, Lily Harper hit send. Already informed the whole class. Heh, now you can't escape even if you sprout wings. Replies flooded in swiftly, setting the trial time for Sunday afternoon. Everyone's busy with work, so it's hard to get together. This time, it's all thanks to your esteemed presence, Miss Braces. Lily Harper trailed off, glancing at Phoebe Hayes's paling face. Let's do it another time, I have something to attend to right now. After I've dealt with it, I'll call you. Phoebe Hayes tried for a natural smile but failed, sighing. Give me some time, I'm not yet. Miss Braces, 6 years, over 2,000 days, Oliver Bennett still has this much influence over you? Impossible. Am I that useless? You all have your careers, I feel inferior in front of you. She gritted her teeth, refusing to admit the truth. Who'd believe that? Lily Harper scoffed. No negotiation, if you don't come, I'll tie you up and drag you there. Anyway, don't worry, Oliver Bennett never attends class reunions. Why? Oliver Bennett was the class president, the student council president, every activity revolved around him. Lily Harper shrugged. Don't know. He doesn't contact us. Heard he's doing bigger and bigger business, now he's among the famous entrepreneurs. He's not an editor. Phoebe Hayes patted her forehead, her mind foggy. I'll tell you later, I have another appointment. I'll let you off the hook for today, Miss Braces. Lily Harper sighed, stepping forward and gently hugging Phoebe Hayes. Promise me, if you ever leave again, you'll say goodbye. I miss you. Love is the lamp, friendship is the shadow. When the lamp is out, you will see the shadow embrace you. Phoebe Hayes's throat tightened, her eyes burning. Words failed her, yet none were needed. She simply hugged the warm shadow tightly. Chapter 3, Television Station, Phew, finally done. The familiar music played, the screen switching to the weather report. Anna Carson removed her microphone, looking at Edward Smith with a relieved sigh. Still nervous? Edward Smith organized his script, chuckling. Since returning from Edinburgh, Anna Carson had officially joined the newsroom, reading the news with him twice a week. Spending time with her, he realized she wasn't a fragile, high-class lady, but rather had a generous and gentle personality. Much better than before. Anna Carson winked playfully. But I like this nervous feeling, it keeps me on my toes. Edward Smith, you're my goal. Well, that goal isn't too far off. Edward Smith's lips curved upwards as he stood and left the studio. His office was down the hall on the right, where he grabbed a file. The news broadcast was only 30 minutes, but it required extensive preparation, meetings with the editorial team, script memorization, and contingency planning for breaking news. After the broadcast, he usually stayed in his office reviewing the news and catching up on world events. By the time he left, the sky was full of stars. You might like it. Who said that? You're a rising star at the station now. The entertainment channel even wants you as a guest. Anna Carson had to practically jog to keep up with his long strides. Edward Smith chuckled, letting the compliment roll off him. Competition at the station was fierce, even the smallest slip-up couldn't be tolerated. Everyone, from ordinary reporters to famous editors, had to tread carefully. What color suit are you wearing the day after tomorrow? I'll coordinate my outfit, Anna Carson said, a playful smile brightening her eyes. Gray. You're so uncreative. Your suits are only gray or blue, you buy 6 identical shirts at a time, and you always order combo C for lunch. A shadow of melancholy flickered across Edward Smith's usually gentle face, but it quickly vanished. It's convenient. Men's clothes are all pretty much the same anyway. Fashion trends change drastically every year. Let's go shopping together sometime, and I'll give you some advice. I'm a fashion expert, you know. How about this Sunday? Anna Carson rushed out the words in a single breath, her face flushing as she worried he might refuse. Before Edward Smith could respond, a fragrant breeze wafted over as Fiona Marks, the Entertainment Channel's star MC, appeared before them. Editor Smith, surely you can spare some time for my interview today. My childhood was uneventful. It's all in my resume. There's really nothing to tell, Edward Smith said apologetically. Fiona Marks, known as the station's beauty, had a particularly emotive hosting style. She was usually polite and professional, but at last year's party, fueled by alcohol, she'd sat on the station director's lap and exchanged drinks with him. This image clashed starkly with her sweet, flower-like smile on screen. Ethan Rivers, sitting next to him, had muttered that this was the unspoken rule of sinking at the station. With so many beautiful women, how else could she hold her position? He remained silent. Netizens think very highly of you. You're practically a celebrity now. If you don't let people see your everyday life, it creates a distance with the audience. This interview is actually the director's idea. I know you're busy, Editor Smith, and I wouldn't normally dare to bother you, Fiona Marks purred, her alluring gaze contrasting with her insistent tone. Anna Carson bristled, her eyes flashing with disdain. Edward Smith smiled faintly, recognizing the inevitability of the situation. He nodded. All right, since Editor Marks has come all this way, I'll gladly comply. Shall we go now? Our team has been on standby to accommodate your schedule, Editor Smith. Let's go then. Edward Smith locked his drawer. It was just as well he hadn't washed his face yet, it saved him from having the makeup artist's fluffy brush sweeping back and forth across it. I'll go with you, Anna Carson said firmly. Don't. You should head home early. Doing something he didn't want to do, with an acquaintance watching, made him even more uncomfortable. Fiona Mark's lips curled slightly. As Edward Smith reached the door, she turned to Anna Carson, her eyes narrowed. Delusional, she hissed before turning and hurrying after Edward Smith. Editor Smith, the interviews I conduct always maintain a light and easy atmosphere. However, I'd like to ask a few sensitive questions. Would you be willing to cooperate? Ask away. Edward Smith ran a hand through his hair, stiff with too much hairspray. Really? Fiona Marks paused. I heard that your original ambition wasn't to be an editor, but a high school math teacher. Upon graduation, you even received an acceptance letter for a master's program. But you ultimately changed your mind and stayed in Beijing. Was it because of someone special? Perhaps it was the angle or the lighting, but the usually affable man suddenly turned icy, several times colder than the average person. Who told you that? Fiona Marks batted her, false eyelashes, smiling faintly. You don't think my job is just about putting on makeup, standing in front of the camera, and looking pretty, do you? Before every program, we research our interviewees. Everyone has their own methods. If it's a private matter you'd rather not discuss, you can simply steer the conversation elsewhere. As a professional, you hardly need me to tell you that, right? Edward Smith frowned, a chill in his eyes. Fiona Marks was perhaps not the airhead she was rumored to be. Conducting interviews was far more tiring than reading the news. Leaving the studio, Edward Smith felt parched, as if he'd been wandering in a desert. Glancing at his watch, he saw it was almost 12 o'clock. Unfinished work would have to wait. He placed the documents he needed to review into his briefcase, closed his office door, and went downstairs to get his car. Just as he reached the parking lot, his phone rang. He pursed his lips wearily, put his briefcase in the car, and answered the call. Editor Smith, your phone is certainly hard to reach. Lily Harper's voice held a hint of reproach, clearly indicating this wasn't her first attempt. He tilted the phone towards a light to check the screen. Several missed calls. I was in the studio and didn't have my phone with me. Does Miss Harper have any instructions? Among his classmates, only Lily Harper remained in teaching. She was the one who contacted everyone if anything came up. Didn't you check the forum messages this afternoon? I didn't notice. He flinched. In truth, he hadn't checked the alumni forum in a long time. I knew you wouldn't have. You always made time for our reunions, no matter how busy you were, so I called to let you know. This year's reunion is scheduled for Sunday. If you have time, please come. What was it with tonight? The interview had already dredged up memories of his 4 years at Beijing Communication University, and now the reunion would unearth those memories, and her, all over again. He closed his eyes in self-mockery. I have several recordings scheduled for that day. I'm afraid I won't be able to make it. Please send my regards to everyone. Of course, everyone will understand. Good night. Lily Harper replied promptly. He closed his phone and started the car. Late as it was, the city, as always, never slept. The roads were still bustling with traffic. He lowered the car window, letting the cool spring night air sting his face. He took a deep breath of the cold air, feeling it calm him down. If he hadn't become an editor, few of his classmates would likely remember him. He'd spent most of his 4 years in university working part-time, focusing on his studies only enough to avoid failing. He hadn't had time to socialize, rarely participated in class activities, and always kept to himself. He'd reconnected with his classmates later, attending reunions, hoping one day to hear news of her from someone, or perhaps, one day, to see her again. They've met. He already knows your news. Without you, among those who know you, there's just another layer of loss. What's the point? In the dust-thick air, he looked up at the inky black night sky. He sighed, pressed the accelerator, and the car shot into the traffic. At this moment, Phoebe Hayes was racing down the street. There was a night bus from her apartment to the radio station. Unexpectedly, the bus broke down halfway. The driver tried to start it for a while, then shook his head in defeat and told everyone to get off and find another bus. She tried to hail a cab for a long time, but every taxi that passed was already occupied. She didn't have time to wait, so she had to run. She rarely exercised, so after running just over 100 meters, she was already panting, her face covered in sweat. Wiping it away, she realized she seemed to be the only person on the street. It was very late. As she ran, she somehow thought of the Thai movie, Come Here and Say You Love Me. In the film, the male lead was a road maintenance engineer. With the city's bustling traffic, road maintenance could only be done at midnight. He slept during the day and worked at night. His previous relationships all failed because of his work schedule. Later, the female lead fell in love with him and was also angry about his work, but because of love, she secretly changed her own work schedule to nights. In the end, those in love became family. And her? What awaited her next? Hopefully, a handsome and charming man. Exhaling, she smiled. The radio station finally appeared before her eyes. 30 minutes left, just enough time. She carefully wiped the sweat from her face, walked towards the entrance, nodded to the security guard, and presented her ID. The radio station at night was no different from the daytime. The corridor was brightly lit, loud discussions were coming from the editorial office, and lights were on in several broadcasting rooms where hosts were recording programs. Stepping into Studio 8, she ran straight into Linda Thompson, whose eyes were blazing. Beside her were several men with their heads bowed, so she couldn't see their expressions. Little Vicky, her newly assigned assistant, had her head bowed so low it almost touched her chest. Phoebe Hayes paused her breath, then slowly exhaled, saying with a smile, "Sorry, there was a problem with the bus, Never mind your bus, what about the current program?" Linda Thompson snapped, her eyes wide. Phoebe Hayes blinked, looking at the others, unsure what was happening. "Tonight's expert couldn't make it. You have to host the show alone." "Me? Alone?" Phoebe Hayes' eyes widened in disbelief. Chapter 4, a deep-voiced Linda Thompson pretended not to hear Phoebe Hayes, turning to little Vicky and saying, "It's time. Go to the studio and get ready. Everyone else, back to the office. Manager Thompson." Phoebe Hayes said anxiously, stepping in front of Linda Thompson. "I know what you're going to say. The station has invested heavily in this program. Are we going to let it fall apart now? I can't, and neither can you. Take some books in there, pick out some good passages to read. If you run out of things to say, play some love songs. If any calls come in, answer them as you see fit. Don't overthink it, just get through tonight. You won't be held responsible for any mistakes with the program." Linda Thompson had made it clear, even if it was a bottomless pit, Phoebe Hayes had no choice but to jump. That specialist, the one keeping her man on the down low, got found out. She went and cussed the woman out, but it turned into a full-blown brawl. 2 against 1, and the specialist still wouldn't back down. "She's in the hospital now." Thompson nearly fainted when she got the call. She'd treated that specialist like gold. Little Vicky watched Linda Thompson return to her office, then leaned in to whisper to Phoebe Hayes. Phoebe Hayes snorted with laughter. No wonder Linda Thompson's face was so pale. "Sis Hayes, specialists are just fancy lights, still just women. Just use your noggin and talk some sense. Don't be scared, I'm right outside with you. You got this." Little Vicky grinned, patted Phoebe Hayes' shoulder, and pushed open the door to the recording studio for her. Once she actually sat down, cold sweat trickled down her forehead, and her fingers trembled uncontrollably on her knees. Not just her hands, but her legs and entire body were stiff, even her cheeks. She took a deep breath, skimming the few pages of the script, her heart pounding in her ears. She had prepared her materials and selected a few music discs. A friend, a high school teacher, had told her about a newly graduated teacher who had a 45-minute lesson plan but finished it in 15, then stood sweating profusely at the podium, paralyzed with anxiety. Now she truly understood how that teacher had felt. Late Night Whisperings was a 1-hour program. What was she supposed to talk about? She had trained as a professional radio host, but she had no practical experience. There wasn't much time to worry. Little Vicky signaled through the glass that it was time. Phoebe bit her lip, nodded, and put on her headphones. In an instant, the world went silent. All other sounds disappeared, and she could clearly hear herself swallow. Reaching out, she pushed up the volume. The gentle lapping of waves and the strumming of a guitar filled the air. The music calmed her slightly. Good evening, listeners. This is Chengdu Radio's Late Night Whisperings _ Cough. Cough. She choked on her saliva, coughing directly into the microphone. Little Vicky sat in her chair, groaning inwardly. She had a feeling Chengdu Radio would be flying its flags at half-mast tomorrow morning. Beijing's climate is so dry. I've been back for a month and still haven't adjusted. Her face flushed crimson, but the coughing fit, instead of making her more nervous, seemed to ground her. Worst-case scenario, she'd just find another job. Did I startle everyone just now? I haven't even introduced myself. I'm Phoebe T. Hayes, and every quiet night, I'll be here to listen to your hearts. On my way to the station today, I passed a music store playing Edward Scissorhands . Someone said Edward's love was an impossible love. Such a heartbreaking description. Depp's performance was truly captivating. The way he looked at her, with such warmth and sincerity, as if loving her was the most wonderful thing in his life. In today's fast-paced society, love has become trivialized, materialized, conditional. To love someone simply for who they are might be considered foolish. Yet, I envy such fools. Back in college, during a class, the professor asked us to read a poem aloud. I chose Yeats's When You Are Old . When I read, how many loved your moments of glad grace, and loved your beauty with love false or true, but one man loved the pilgrim's soul in you, and loved the sorrows of your changing face, I suddenly longed for love, for that one person who would love the wrinkles on my face someday. I started college early, before I turned 18. Was I mature for my age? Ms. Hayes, there's a call coming in. Little Vicky's cheerful voice came through the headset. Phoebe Hayes waved outwards. All right, let's listen to a friend's story. Hello, I hear you. Yes, this is Midnight Whispers. Cousin Chu, the caller was a woman, her voice hoarse, as if she had just finished crying. Phoebe T. Hayes, your voice is so gentle. You're right, loving someone is truly a beautiful and magical thing. But why is love also so painful? Did you have a fight with your boyfriend? Not my boyfriend, my husband. We were in love for 4 years and just got married after the new year. I was supposed to be on duty tonight, but I felt a little unwell, so I came home. I opened the door and found him and his colleague sleeping on our wedding bed. Ah. I really wanted to kill them, but I couldn't. Phoebe Hayes exhaled. What explanation did he give you? Such a familiar, vulgar story, yet men never seem to tire of acting it out. He said he and his colleague were drinking, she got drunk and went to the wrong bed, he held the wrong person. Phoebe T. Hayes, they were both very drunk, but I weigh 40 kilograms, his colleague weighs 60 kilograms, does it feel the same to hold them? Tell me, where did the 20 kilograms of flesh go? The woman's hoarse voice made Phoebe Hayes' eardrums ache faintly. Phoebe Hayes rubbed her temples, as if seeing a large, bright red slab of meat at the supermarket. Maybe he's not lying. What? What if he thought he was hugging a duvet? A 60 kilograms woman's body is soft and bouncy. Is that possible? Really? Could it be? The woman cried out. Do you love him? I love him, very much. The woman sobbed. Then it's probably true, she said with certainty. Bidding little Vicky farewell, another call was patched through. This time it was a man, his voice deep and warm. In the quiet of the night, such a voice was truly mesmerizing. What a strange thought. Phoebe Hayes chuckled softly, hello. She heard the sound of a car horn on the other end. Are you driving? I've stopped. His tone, though calm and indifferent, felt like the quiet before a storm. That's good. She didn't urge him, patiently waiting for him to continue. The man's breathing was sometimes heavy, sometimes light. Sir, can you hear me? Yes, your voice is very similar to someone I know. Before speaking, he sighed softly. Is she also in Beijing? No, he paused, as if holding back, suppressing some intense emotion. She left Beijing many years ago. A month ago, I happened to meet her, but she didn't remember me. Perhaps the lighting wasn't good, and she didn't see you. Although it was dark, I stood in front of her and even helped her with her luggage. She said to me, thank you, handsome. Then she turned and left. Are you two lovers? He trembled slightly, a smile forming, a self-deprecating sound to Phoebe Hayes's ears. We're just classmates. Just classmates? Then there's no reason for her to pretend not to know you. You must be mistaken. Could she have lost a contact lens? It happened to me once. Rushing to the elevator, I tripped over my luggage, my lens popped out, and the taxi was waiting. I had to squint my way out. I wouldn't have recognized my own parents if they were standing in front of me. A low chuckle of amusement, then I suppose I misunderstood her. Her eyesight really isn't good. You care about her a great deal, don't you? He trembled again, a long pause before he spoke. She's married. His mournful tone inexplicably tightened Phoebe Hayes's chest. She opened her eyes wide, saw little Vicky give the okay sign, and knew her time was almost up. There's a time in life when you give yourself to someone, not hoping for much in return, not demanding companionship, not requiring possession, not even caring about a response. Just being able to meet that person in the best years of your life is enough. These words are for you, and for all the listeners of tonight's Late Night Whisperings. Join me, Phoebe T. Hayes, tomorrow at the same time on Chengdu Radio. Until then. She took off her headphones, finally feeling grounded. Sister Hayes, you've got real potential. I knew I picked the right person. Little Vicky grinned, pushing open the studio door. Linda Thompson exited first, sweeping Phoebe Hayes with a glance. It's too early to say. Wait for the listener feedback tomorrow. Sentimental drivel. Little Vicky stuck her tongue out at Linda Thompson's retreating figure. She's always acting like she's dying. Don't mind her. I thought it was great, Sister Hayes. How did you come up with the blanket analogy? Haha. That girl lost control. Don't you think she actually loves her husband? She just wanted an excuse to forgive him. I just gave her a little nudge. Phoebe Hayes twisted open a water bottle and drank deeply. So freaking low. So many people died, why didn't he? Little Vicky pouted. Sister Hayes, our first collaboration was awesome. You make it feel so natural. Our listenership is going to explode. And I'm totally obsessed with the voice of that guy who called in later. Like a radio announcer. A radio announcer wouldn't do that. Afraid the reporters would have too much free time. She'd thought the same thing initially, but quickly dismissed the idea. Leaving the radio station, the streets were nearly deserted. A strong gust of wind sent scraps of paper swirling across the road. She pushed her hair back from her forehead, too tired to wait for the bus, and hailed a taxi. Lifting her arm, she realized the muscles in her back were stiff. The elevator ascended, stopping at her floor. Just her and the man opposite. Did he have a late appointment too? Had she been a step quicker, perhaps their paths would have crossed, and she was truly curious about his appearance and his voice. Sometimes, it's like that, just a step ahead or a step behind, and life wouldn't be the same. Tonight, listening to the story of that man with the deep, warm voice made her feel deeply moved. She offered him the classic line from the movie The Notebook, a gift meant for him, but also for herself. Yet, few people could be so magnanimous. At the start of every love, who doesn't hope for a perfect ending? Yesterday, she sat at the gates of Beijing Communication University until midnight, watching the students, just like they were back then, chins held high, full of youthful vigor. Whether it was becoming a broadcaster or a host, it wasn't her aspiration, but her mother's wish. Because after graduation, she could secure a good job, and subsequently, meet a good man. She didn't think that far ahead, but her mother seemed like a sorceress with a crystal ball, capable of predicting the future. Indeed, she met Oliver Bennett at Beijing Communication University. Chapter 5, Supreme Martial Arts. Lily Harper, smitten with her English teacher and unable to sleep, crawled into Phoebe Hayes's bed, restless like a caterpillar in its final stage. She declared, "Love is a fire, once it starts burning fiercely, doing crazy things and saying foolish words is normal. Right now, if you told me to die for him, I would." Phoebe Hayes was incredibly sleepy, yet she forced her eyes open to listen to Lily Harper. Lily Harper wouldn't just monologue, every few sentences, she'd shake Phoebe, expecting a response. Finally losing her patience, she sat bolt upright, looked at Lily Harper, and said, "Love is like some legendary supreme martial art, you're completely possessed because of him." Heh heh, profound. Lily Harper gave her a thumbs up in the darkness. She rolled her eyes dismissively and flopped back down onto the bed with a thud. If one day she began to practice this supreme martial art, every move would have to be precise, natural, and flawless. She couldn't end up like David Owens, neither god nor demon. Looking back, she found that thought incredibly amusing. She met Oliver Bennett during freshman year military training. Actually, before that, during the opening ceremony, Oliver Bennett, representing the freshmen, gave a speech that dazzled the female students below. God is fair in his creation, if he grants you exceptional looks, he certainly won't grant you exceptional talent. It's rare to find someone with both talent and looks, they are either God's favorites or a calamity for the opposite sex. Oliver Bennett seemed to be the former. Phoebe Hayes was restless that day, her canvas bag containing all her possessions nowhere to be found. She paid no attention to who was on stage, nor the whispers in the crowd. Her mind played a slow-motion film, replaying scene after scene, recalling the time, the place, who she met, and what she did. The canvas bag was later found in a restroom by the lake. She heard someone mention the name Oliver Bennett, her expression blank with incomprehension. That autumn in Beijing, the sun beat down relentlessly each day, and the new university students groaned under the strain of military training. For the first 2 days, it was bearable, practicing standing at attention and organizing the dormitories, Phoebe Hayes could handle it. On the 3rd day, the instructor had them running under the scorching sun. After one lap, Phoebe Hayes's vision started to blur, her head swam, and as she tried to raise her hand to excuse herself, she stumbled forward uncontrollably. She didn't faint, just felt incredibly embarrassed. She tried to get up quickly, but when she put her hand on the ground and saw the bright red blood, everything went black. When she woke up, she was in the infirmary, surrounded by a crowd of people. She tried to speak, but as soon as she opened her mouth, a sharp pain took her breath away. The doctor examined her and said she had low blood pressure and shouldn't overexert herself in the sun. She might be excused from military training. The other girls chattered excitedly, saying her fainting spell had killed 2 birds with 1 stone, getting close to Oliver Bennett and getting out of hard labor. Oliver Bennett? Her brow furrowed slightly as she looked at everyone in confusion. "You don't know who Oliver Bennett is, one of the girls asked, exasperated. The freshman representative who gave the speech. A ripple of laughter went through the group. It turned out Oliver Bennett was the hero who had carried her to the infirmary, the adjective, handsome, being deemed appropriate for him. Feeling indebted, she felt compelled to repay the favor. That evening, she went to the supermarket, bought several kilos of fruit, and headed to the male dormitory to thank the handsome hero. Her dorm mates volunteered to accompany her, even the usually aloof Mandy Hope. Unfortunately, they didn't find Oliver Bennett. He was a local and had gone home with his family for the evening. Since the main character was absent, they couldn't just leave immediately. The girls politely sat down, and the boys rushed to peel fruit and serve snacks, as if hosting a tea party. Conversation flowed easily, and they quickly became acquainted. "Would you like some water?" a boy sitting to Phoebe Hayes's right asked softly. Phoebe Hayes wet her dry lips and nodded. The water dispenser was in the hallway. The boy took an enamel mug and went out. He wore a slightly yellowed white shirt and black trousers, his hair cropped short, his figure tall and thin. Lily Harper whispered to her that his name was Edward Smith, from the mountains of Sichuan, the only student at Beijing Communication University to receive a scholarship that year. The admissions professor said he had a naturally clear voice and a steady demeanor, suited to be a news editor. Edward Smith handed her the water. Phoebe Hayes thanked him and took the mug, noticing the calluses on his palm as their hands brushed. The water was cool and slightly sweet. She looked up in surprise, and he gave her a gentle smile before turning away. Having heard that her nosebleed had stained Oliver Bennett's t-shirt, Phoebe Hayes felt she had to meet him and thank him personally. Exempt from military training, affording her ample leisure, she was summoned by the advisor to the library for the tedious task of reorganizing old books, a form of compulsory labor. Separated from the majority for nearly 2 weeks, she'd almost forgotten her intention to express gratitude. One evening, while fetching water, she overheard Mandy Hope's gentle greeting, "Oliver Bennett, you're here for water too." Glancing up, she caught only the retreating figure of a tall male student in a dark blue t-shirt. Her first formal encounter with Oliver Bennett, face-to-face, was in the broadcast language expression class, a day marked by her acute awkwardness. The professor distributed copies of a script, news of John Taylor's victory in the 110-meter hurdles, for each student to read aloud. Prior experience was limited to reciting poetry or delivering speeches. News reporting was unfamiliar territory, rendering accurate delivery and vocal control near impossible. Some readings were overly enthusiastic, voices cracking at high pitches, eliciting laughter. Most were monotonous, like the steady drip of a water filter. Lily Harper, in a tight-fitting t-shirt knotted at her waist, drew the professor's critique, not for her reading, but for turning the news into a personal beauty pageant, diverting attention from the content to her curves. Lily, mortified, nearly wept in her seat. Phoebe Hayes, smiling and poised, delivered her reading with apparent confidence, lifting her head expectantly. The professor, his expression unchanged, offered no comment. Trembling inwardly, she glanced around nervously. "Professor," she stammered, fearfully. "What's John Taylor to you? His victory, does it entitle you to a share of the prize? Look at you, grinning like a Cheshire cat. We're both Chinese." "I'm proud of him," she retorted, a hint of defiance in her voice. "So, if he wins at the Asian Games, will you be banging gongs and drums in front of the screen?" "If the live broadcast allows gongs and drums, I will." "Nonsense." The professor slammed his hand on the table. "Bam, every word, every facial expression of a broadcaster represents the gravity and authority of the news, conveying the production's message to the audience. It's not a platform for personal display. Then what's the difference between a broadcaster and a puppet? Wouldn't a robot be easier?" Emboldened by a sudden surge of courage, she stood up and challenged him. A ripple of laughter and a lone wolf whistle followed. The fundamental requirements for a news broadcaster are experience, a resonant voice. You, however, are being extreme. The professor's face darkened, his voice trembled, his hair practically stood on end. Alright, we'll discuss this further after class. Next student, please begin. Next up was Oliver Bennett. In stark contrast to her naiveness, his performance rivaled that of a seasoned professional. She shot him a sideways glance, itching to punch him in the back. As class ended, she made for the back door, only to be stopped by the professor's call. Lily Harper offered a sympathetic shrug. With a brave wave, she urged Lily to go ahead. Let's walk and talk. The professor, notebook in hand, strolled with her along the corridor. The professor's bald head was quite something. A gust of wind ruffled the few remaining strands of hair, forcing him to smooth them down to maintain his image. Phoebe Hayes, you're a very bright student, it's just that you're a bit of a show-off. Her mind drifted, finding herself in a dark tunnel, walking with an old man, slowly, silently. Emerging from the tunnel into blinding light, she saw Oliver Bennett, holding her cloth bag, standing before her. Oliver Bennett, with his handsome features and slightly wavy hair, approached confidently, exuding arrogance from his skin, blood, and very bones. Having missed lunch, she and Oliver Bennett went to a small eatery near the academy for a bowl of noodles. Because of her braces, she couldn't eat too quickly, and afterward, she carefully checked her teeth in a mirror. Back then, she hadn't developed the habit of keeping her makeup bag in her purse. After eating, she asked the vendor for a glass of water to quickly rinse her face. Paying the bill and arriving back at the academy gates, she said goodbye to Oliver Bennett, who stared at her, smiling. She anxiously touched her face, worried something was stuck there. Open your mouth, don't worry, I washed my hands. Oliver Bennett said. Clueless, she obediently opened her mouth wide. Oliver Bennett pulled out a piece of green vegetable from her teeth. Her head buzzed, her neck flushed crimson, and she wished the earth would swallow her whole. There were 2 afternoon classes, both in the large lecture hall. When she entered, Oliver Bennett was reading. As she passed him, he lifted the bag from the seat next to him, looking at her with a smile. Forget it, I'll sit in the back. Lily Harper, ever practical, pouted and walked away. She didn't hear a word the professor said that day, feeling as if she were floating in mid-air, her heart aflutter and feeling foreign for the first time. Are you making eyes at Oliver Bennett or something? Lily Harper quietly asked her. No way. We barely spoke. She lowered her head to eat, not daring to look at Oliver Bennett, who was sitting at a table not far away. That evening, while going downstairs to get water, she ran into Oliver Bennett, who walked her back, carrying her thermos. Things naturally progressed. From the library to the classroom, she would always sit next to Oliver Bennett. On weekends, when classmates went out together, she was the one on the back of his bicycle. Lily Harper asked her again, and she said they were study buddies. Pulling my leg. Lily Harper scoffed, shaking her head and ignoring her. She felt wronged. Oliver Bennett had never said he liked her, but if they weren't study buddies, then what were they? In the late autumn of her sophomore year, she turned 18. It was a Friday, and everyone went out for hot pot to celebrate her gaining the right to vote. One of the boys volunteered to order, taking a trip to the kitchen and returning with a mysterious air, saying they would have something special tonight, something both delicious and nutritious. What is it, exactly? Is it poisonous or something? She asked nervously. Afraid of what? It can clear heat and replenish chi. The boy patted his belly heroically. A large bowl of soup was brought up. She used a ladle to scoop out what was inside. What is this? In the ladle were a few pieces of meat that looked like duck necks. Eel. The boy winked mischievously. Miss Braces is indeed smart, the answer is close, guess again. She panicked and dropped the ladle. It's not snake, is it? The boys laughed heartily. I'm not eating this. Just hearing about this reptile made her face pale. While everyone else ate happily, she could only nibble on some small buns to line her stomach. "So sorry, I forgot to bring this dish up earlier." The vendor apologized, bringing up a plate of thinly sliced, white, shredded pieces. "Is this sea cucumber?" She leaned in for a closer look, then turned to ask Oliver Bennett. "Similar, but not quite. However, it's much more nutritious than sea cucumber, very good for the skin." Oliver Bennett replied with a straight face. Curious, she picked up a piece with her chopsticks and put it in her mouth. Sweet, cold, an indescribable taste on her tongue. Deemed edible, she swallowed. "Ha!" The boy who ordered the dish pointed at her and burst out laughing. She glared at him, annoyed. Lily Harper's face crumpled. "That's snake skin." She turned and ran outside, standing under a tree, vomiting until nothing but bile remained. "Are you all right?" Oliver Bennett patted her back and handed her a bottle of water. She rinsed her mouth repeatedly, still tasting the fishy flavor. Turning around, she punched Oliver Bennett. "It's all your fault, all your fault." Oliver Bennett didn't dodge, letting her hit him. Seeing the smirk on his lips, she became even angrier, tears welling up in her eyes and spilling down her cheeks. All right, it's all my fault, don't cry." He smiled, reaching out and gently wrapping his arms around her waist, lowering his head, his gaze deep and sincere. She froze, stiff as a statue, not daring to move, silently watching him draw closer, lifting her chin. "Let me take care of that strange taste." He gently kissed her lips, nibbling softly, possessively claiming her. Chapter 6, Past Story. Typical Beijing spring weather meant sandstorms. The sky was a dull yellow, sand swirling in the air. Luckily, the roads were filled with cars, not sheep, otherwise Phoebe Hayes would have thought she was on the Highland Plateau. Lily Harper invited her out for tea, conveniently scouting the restaurant where the class reunion would be held. "They're all doing pretty well now, worked hard to get where they are today, so absolutely no entertainment reporters." Sniffing around. The meeting place has to be both comfortable and discreet. Phoebe Hayes, who was cooking instant noodles, couldn't help but laugh, the phone she was holding between her ear and shoulder almost falling. "Being a celebrity is exhausting. Give me half an hour. I'm not a handsome guy, why would I need makeup? No, I just woke up. I need to eat something anyway." Lily Harper shrieked, "Are you crazy? It's 12 noon in Beijing. Don't tell me you haven't adjusted your time yet. Busy right now, gotta hang up." For some reason, even with a good friend like Lily Harper, Phoebe Hayes didn't want to talk about hosting late-night confession. The gig might not last, so why bother mentioning it? There was no radio in her apartment, and she hadn't called the station. She had no idea how listeners reacted last night. Anxiety gnawed at her, but she told herself that if anything was amiss, the station would contact her. Right now, she needed to stay calm. Her apartment wasn't large, the dining room was the living room. She sat down and switched on the TV. Midday 30-inch, the news program, was on. The anchor, face grim, read the headlines. The worst blizzard in 50 years had slammed northern Germany, felling trees and collapsing houses. Floods ravaged several South American countries, dark-skinned residents stood on rooftops, staring at the bleak sky. A Mexican oil tanker had a major leak, dead fish bobbing on the oily surface. After finishing a bowl of noodles, Phoebe Hayes hadn't heard a single uplifting news item. It wasn't just her having a bad day, it seemed the whole world was in mourning. After washing the dishes, she returned to the living room. The news anchor was now reporting domestic news. Yesterday afternoon, with the assistance of British police, Henry Bennett, the former Minister of Defence, who had embezzled funds and fled to the UK 6 years prior, had been extradited and handed over to the prosecutor's office for investigation and processing. The name sounded familiar. Phoebe Hayes hurried closer to the TV, but the screen had already switched to the next news item. Lily Harper's white Jetta was crammed with stuff, laptop, books, tissues, snacks, even toothpaste and a toothbrush. Phoebe Hayes had to wait while Lily cleared a space in the front seat. This car is like half my house, full of essentials, Lily Harper said, glancing at Phoebe Hayes with a sheepish grin. If your boyfriend ever sees this mess, his image of you might take a nosedive, Phoebe Hayes warned gently. Lily Harper stared straight ahead. I don't have a boyfriend. A lover, then. Or a husband. Lily Harper remained silent. Phoebe Hayes turned, noticing a wry, self-deprecating smile on her lips. Victor Harris is divorced. Because of you. Phoebe Hayes felt a prickle of heat in her nose. Victor Harris was the professor Lily Harper had hopelessly loved in college. Like a woman possessed, Lily had pulled strings after graduation to secure a teaching position at the same university, just to be near him. Lily Harper shook her head. I'm not that unscrupulous. His wife went to Canada for a year-long fellowship, and they separated amicably after that. So, do you have a chance now? God knows. Miss Braces, change the subject. Lily Harper sighed. The car stopped at a traffic light. Neither spoke, staring at the long line of cars ahead. Lily Harper honked the horn in frustration. Lily Harper. Phoebe Hayes grabbed her hand. Miss Braces, I know I'm a fool, but I can't turn back. What should I do? Lily Harper looked at her, tears streaming down her face. She couldn't offer Lily Harper any comfort. Lily Harper took Phoebe Hayes to a vegetarian restaurant called Awakening Buddha Mind. Tucked away behind 3 ancient trees, it looked more like a private club. Inside, the air was free of greasy smells, the space surprisingly simple yet elegant. A small birdcage hung in the main hall, its chirping filling the air, creating the illusion of being surrounded by nature. The dining hall had long benches, seating over 10 people. Lily Harper, quite pleased, had booked it for Sunday evening. Neither of them was particularly hungry, so they ordered a pot of tea and a plate of crystal rice rolls, recommended by the owner. The dish looked a bit like sushi, with a sweet, crisp taste. Still used to eating with chopsticks? Lily Harper watched Phoebe Hayes pick up her chopsticks. You should be asking if I'm used to Western food. Lily Harper smirked, her eyes fixed on Phoebe Hayes. Miss Braces, confess. Why did you leave the country without a word? I was young then, thought love was everything. When it fell apart, even breathing the same air as him was agonizing. Lily Harper shot her a look, don't give me that. You two are on the same earth. Moving to Mars would be more believable. Phoebe Hayes covered her mouth with a soft laugh. You're definitely hiding something. I remember the week before graduation, you weren't. In the dorm, you. Your nosiness hasn't changed a bit. Wasting time in a tea house reminiscing like an old lady, aren't you embarrassed? Come on, help me buy some books. She beckoned for the bill. Don't think you're off the hook. I'll find out someday. Lily Harper huffed, giving her a disdainful look. Go ahead, investigate. I'm ready for inspection by the party and the people. Phoebe Hayes pocketed her hands, looking up at the tilted spring sky, seemingly indifferent. The International Exhibition Center was hosting a book fair, so they headed straight there. Phoebe Hayes remembered the library at Beijing Communication University, filled with world literature and specialized textbooks. She browsed a few shelves, then, as if discovering a vibrant new world, found everything from fortune-telling, dream interpretation, and astrology to personality tests. Phoebe Hayes felt she needed to brush up on these areas, just in case someone called in complaining about something, she could handle it. She grabbed a shopping basket and quickly filled it with a large stack of books. The bestsellers now are books on getting rich, health, and parenting. As the elevator reached the second floor, Lily Harper looked up and suddenly frowned. Miss Braces, let's go to a different bookstore. Why? They have all the books I'm looking for here. Phoebe Hayes was surprised. Lily Harper bit her lower lip. I forgot something important. Oliver Bennett's company has a branch here. We might run into him. Phoebe Hayes froze for a few seconds, her knuckles white against the shopping basket. Ha, if we see him, we'll just say hello. She turned away. True, Beijing isn't that big. We're bound to run into him sooner or later. It's been so long, who cares anymore? Lily Harper raised an eyebrow, her tone remarkably brave. Phoebe Hayes pretended to rearrange the books in her basket, her eyes downcast. He had plenty of friends, and now such a successful career, why would he care about her? At 21, she understood, a man who deceives you clearly doesn't cherish the relationship or care about your feelings. Every love story begins differently, but they all end the same. His gaze wanders, praising other women in your presence. Your flaws, once tolerable, become unbearable. Unanswered calls, days without seeing him. Finally, like a fool, you learn the truth from someone else. That year, Beijing's weather was brutal. Scorching days gave way to stormy evenings. Across from Beijing television, she watched him share an umbrella with Mandy Hope, their closeness palpable. He sheltered her, letting his own side get soaked. A passing car sent up a spray of water, they stepped back, Mandy slipped, falling against him. Frozen, she watched him gently wipe the water from Mandy's forehead, the umbrella forgotten on the ground. Mandy Hope saw her first, startled. He looked over, his gaze across the rain cold and somber, annoyed by her untimely appearance. After seeing Mandy Hope into a taxi, he circled the overpass, taking a long time to reach her. Drenched, she shivered, barely able to stand. Tell me it's not true, she said, her clenched fists trembling, forcing the words out. He remained silent. She waited 10 minutes, he still said nothing. She turned and walked away. He didn't follow. Boom. Thunder cracked, the rain intensifying. There it is. Lily Harper nudged her, gesturing towards a booth. She looked up, seeing the sign, Hua Qing Culture Company. 2 young women sat at a signing table, a line of girls waiting in front. Authors these days, not only talented, but beautiful too. Hua Qing seems to sign a lot of pretty authors, their books sell like hotcakes. Oh, they also sign celebrities. Lily Harper rattled off a few names, then, seeing Phoebe Hayes' indifference, said, There's this huge international star, been to the Oscars, haven't you even heard of him? Phoebe Hayes nodded. Crazy, crazy. 6 years abroad, and you've been living under a rock. I followed the Olympics, the Wenchuan earthquake. I even donated. Lily Harper clasped her hand with mock solemnity. Comrade Phoebe Hayes, on behalf of the nation, I sincerely thank you for your patriotic fervor. The world was vast, they didn't run into Oliver Bennett. Whether relief or regret, Lily Harper sighed throughout the drive back. Phoebe Hayes, however, found it rather pleasant. I'll pick you up on Sunday. Lily Harper didn't go upstairs, but opened the car window and shouted to Phoebe Hayes. The books were so heavy that Phoebe Hayes leaned half her body and struggled to turn around, waving her hand. Before she could catch her breath, little Vicky called, sounding breathless, Director Lawrence wants you here at 10 o'clock for a meeting with the program team. Didn't he say anything else? Phoebe Hayes asked. Little Vicky paused for a moment. You'll find out when you get to the station. Phoebe Hayes didn't think much about it, she had already prepared her program. Well. She went inside, drew a warm bath, did her laundry, and tidied up her room. Afterwards, she made herself a cup of coffee, took out the books and CDs she had bought that day, quickly selected the music she needed, listened to William Duke playing the piano, and started writing her script. After finishing the script, she looked at the time, it was 9:10. She stretched, saved the script, toasted 2 slices of bread, and ate an apple. After checking everything, she stepped out the door at exactly 10 o'clock. The elevator was on the ground floor. She pressed the button. Someone was coming up. The elevator ascended slowly, stopping every few floors. There seemed to be quite a few people inside. She stared at the numbers as they climbed, impatiently shifting her weight from one foot to the other. Ding! The elevator doors in front of her slowly opened, and she instinctively stepped aside to make way. A young man stepped out, his face handsome, his nose high and straight, his hair black, his bright, cold eyes holding a hint of warmth. How could it be him? Phoebe Hayes stared blankly at the figure that had suddenly appeared before her, so stunned she forgot to breathe. Chapter 7, Neighbors. How could Edward Smith not be startled? He closed his eyes, thinking he was hallucinating again. When he opened his eyes, under the soft light, the small, slender figure was still standing there, her eyes wide open. To say she was startled would be an understatement. She was clearly stunned. Phoebe Hayes, what are you doing here? He tried to calm the shock in his chest, a gentle smile appearing on his lips. Phoebe Hayes hadn't even opened her mouth when she heard a ding, and the elevator doors closed, descending. Groaning inwardly, she couldn't help but look up, putting on a delighted expression. Hi, Edward Smith, what a coincidence. You live here too? In fact, the moment she saw him step out of the elevator, she knew the answer. She hadn't anticipated his confirmation, but rather his denial. You live here too? Edward Smith pointed to her front door. She gave a wry smile. Fancy that, we're neighbors. She wasn't short, but he was very tall. Talking to him, she had to look up, feeling his overwhelming presence even more, making her want to flee. Thinking that way felt disloyal. Edward Smith was the only person in their class who didn't call her Miss Braces, but actually called her Phoebe Hayes. During their 4 years at Beijing Communication University, the number of times they had seen each other could be counted on one hand. He was a very busy person, rushing off to part-time jobs after class, not even going home during winter and summer breaks, both to save on travel expenses and to earn tuition. His part-time work took up so much of his energy that his academic performance wasn't ideal, which made the professor who had specially recruited him shake his head in regret every time he mentioned him. Yet, Edward bore all the hardships with equanimity. Freshman year, in the boys' dorm, he offered her a cup of tea. Sophomore year, they were in the same group, collaborating on a performance, reciting April Memories. Junior year, the class went to Amoy Zoo to shop for clothes. Everyone got separated, leaving her and him together. Unexpectedly, both their wallets were stolen. They had to walk back to the academy. Her feet were blistered, and at the academy gate, seeing Oliver Bennett, she refused to move another inch. Oliver Bennett carried her back to the dorm. There was another time. It seems like a small thing, not worth mentioning. She found it strange. Why was she nervous in front of him? Her fingertips trembled involuntarily, her speech so flustered she was almost breathless. Was it because seeing him reminded her of the unresolved feelings with Oliver Bennett? Perhaps, once bitten, twice shy. What a coincidence. Edward Smith stared at the elegant face before him, then shifted his gaze to her bag and street clothes, asking in surprise, Are you going out? Yes, I'm rushing to work. The life-saving elevator started ascending again. I'll give you a ride. He turned, standing beside her. No need, there's a bus to Chengdu Broadcasting, it's very convenient. The words left her mouth, and she wished she could bite her tongue off. She'd practically given herself away. It's really not far. Don't be so polite, we're old classmates. He smiled, his expression clearly not allowing her to refuse. She returned a helpless smile. The elevator doors opened, he leaned aside, letting her enter first, then stepped in, standing on the other side. In the small space, even standing against the walls, they could clearly hear each other's breaths. She clutched her chest, afraid he'd hear her pounding heart. Every second felt like a light year, and this was just the beginning. His car was like him, a dark gray Passat, understated yet steady. The interior was the complete opposite of Lily Harper's car, clean as if it had just left the factory. No food, no books, no CDs, no perfume, no tissues. It was early spring, and sitting on the leather seat, she felt a chill throughout her body. This car was exactly what one would call a mode of transportation, its sole function. She fastened her seatbelt and took a deep breath. Perhaps due to the sandstorm, there were few cars on the road tonight. The broad, flat boulevard seemed to stretch endlessly ahead, presenting an unusual clear path, and because of its vastness, it felt somewhat clear yet cold, and because of this clarity and coldness, the silence in the car made the atmosphere even more awkward. She coughed a few times, trying to appear more natural. Have a cold? He wasn't like other classmates who hadn't seen each other in years, chattering endlessly. He seemed focused on driving, getting her to her destination quickly. No, just a little itchy throat. The weather in Beijing has gotten worse since we graduated. Yes. In this aspect, foreign countries do much better than ours. She finally found a topic to discuss, so she talked about everything from the Auckland sunshine to Edinburgh's ancient architecture, from her first job to her current one. He didn't interrupt, just often glanced at her, showing an encouraging smile, or making a few sounds to let her know he was listening. It wasn't just the circumstances that had changed, he had changed a lot too. From his clothes to his demeanor, he was no longer the gentle, readily laughing student he once was. He was still gentle, but this gentleness wasn't empty. He knew how to be appropriately reserved and expressive, maintaining just the right distance, giving you a sense of closeness without causing misunderstandings. And his voice, when raised, was exciting, when lowered, truly captivating. Do you want to listen to the radio? Like a primary school student, she recounted everything that had happened in the past 6 years. When the atmosphere fell silent again, he asked her. Sure. As long as there was sound, it was fine. He turned on the radio, and the host's excited voice, as if he had just found a treasure, startled her. It turned out to be a Chengdu radio advertisement, and the MC was enthusiastically introducing the functions of a rice cooker, which could not only cook rice, but also soup and porridge, with customizable timings, so that no matter when you got home, you could have a hot meal. Sounds good. While waiting for the green light, he turned to look at her. She stared blankly at the streetlights outside the window, lost in thought. Huh. Hearing him speak, she quickly turned her head back. He saw the mark left on the corner of her mouth where she had bitten it. Class reunion on Sunday, are you free to go? If I don't go, Lily Harper will kill me. The corner of his mouth curved, not quite a smile. Seeing the green light, he turned his head and focused on driving, arriving at Radio Chengdu after a short distance. He drove to the main entrance. She thanked him and got out of the car with her laptop. He called out to her, reminding her, be careful on your way back. The wind was strong, so she couldn't hear him clearly and leaned slightly closer to the car window, her eyes not looking directly at him but towards the front of the car, as if there was something interesting there. He rolled his eyes. Go on in. Goodbye. She waved to him and turned to go inside. While showing her ID card to the security guard, she felt a pang of unease, suddenly remembering that she had recounted everything that had happened to her in the past 6 years on the way here, but she knew nothing about him. She turned back to the door and looked at the traffic on the road, but couldn't find his car. Edward Smith came home early today, bringing work with him, but he found he couldn't seem to focus. Outside the window was a deep night, like a tablecloth covering everything, distant lights flickering off one by one as the city was about to fall asleep. He paced back and forth in his room, ignoring the time and calling Ethan Rivers. Are you crazy? Didn't you look at the clock? I have to go abroad with reporters tomorrow. Ethan Rivers, just woken up, was furious. I know, but I really want to find someone to have a drink with. Are you coming here, or am I going over there? Edward Smith's eyes were full of excitement. You're drinking. Your throat can handle that kind of abuse. Are you bored without a paparazzi tale, trying to give them a juicy headline? The occasional drink won't kill me. With your tolerance, drinking with you is no fun. Despite his words, Ethan Rivers had sobered up completely. No fun drinking, then let's just chat. Ethan, can I come over to your place? Don't. The station's already on edge after that online post about the editor's love life today. If you get caught driving under the influence, I can't cover for you. That article was ridiculous, though, speculating. Wildly based on a similar voice, even claiming they'd tracked down the caller's number. Hey, it did wonders for Chengdu radio, though. They became famous overnight. Edward Smith chuckled, looking down. Everyone needs a listener, even editors. Ethan Rivers stared. Don't tell me you actually made that call. Of course not. With a good mate like you, why would I need some random hotline? Right. Wait up, I'll be right over. Edward Smith pulled out some beers from the fridge and prepared some snacks. When Ethan Rivers arrived, they sat listening to music, drinking and chatting, mostly about work and their programs. Nothing too personal, but Ethan Rivers could see Edward Smith was in high spirits. Pity his tolerance was low, he was out cold after just 2 beers. He helped Edward Smith to bed, tidied up a bit, and as he was leaving, Phoebe Hayes was fumbling with her keys at the door. Hearing him, she jumped, startled, and turned around nervously. So sorry. Ethan Rivers offered an apologetic smile, wondering why this girl was getting home so late. She seemed decent enough, probably worked the night shift. It's okay. Phoebe Hayes watched him walk to the elevator before unlocking her own door. Ethan Rivers glanced back, narrowing his eyes. Could Edward's good mood be because of the pretty neighbor across the hall? Chapter 8, Overly sensitive. Closing the door, alone in the darkness, Phoebe Hayes was lost in thought. She recognized the man who had just left Edward Smith's apartment. He was Ethan Rivers, 2 years her senior in university, the student union president. A prominent figure back then, capable and charismatic. He landed a job at CCTV right after graduation, the envy of all the freshmen, including her. Oliver Bennett was close friends with him, and she'd tagged along with Oliver to a few of their gatherings. He probably hadn't noticed her back then, judging by his reaction when he saw her just now. She just found it odd. Why would he be at Edward Smith's apartment, smelling of alcohol? Edward Smith, she repeated, etching the name in her mind. Tonight, it seemed she couldn't escape the name. Her thoughts were a tangled mess. The evening meeting for the Late Night Whispers program was led by David Lawrence. He began by praising her for single-handedly carrying the show, commending her dedication. Then, he abruptly shifted gears, sternly criticizing her for fundamentally misunderstanding the program's purpose. Late Night Whispers was meant to be a confidant, a space for listeners struggling with matters of the heart to release their emotions, not a literary platform for young people to wax poetic. It didn't need flowery language, it needed real-life stories, grounded in reality. The music selection should be current, popular, and relatable. If things continued as they were the previous night, the show would be cancelled sooner or later. David Lawrence's tone was heavy, his demeanor serious, so from the team leader to the editor, no one dared to speak. She sat quietly, offering no argument, though she felt she hadn't done anything wrong. Her perspective simply differed from David Lawrence's, so naturally, her view wouldn't align. But she understood, David Lawrence's expectations for this program were incredibly high. Don't be discouraged, keep trying. The first time is always tough, but it wasn't a complete failure. After the meeting, David Lawrence called her back. Her expression revealed a sense of helplessness, she worried she wouldn't meet his expectations. Are you and Edward Smith, the CCTV editor, close? David Lawrence looked up, asking abruptly. His sharp gaze startled her. Edward Smith, a CCTV editor. Did you ask him to make that call? David Lawrence winked. What call? Confused, she stared at him, bewildered by his wink. Last night, after that man called, were you unaware of the potential online fallout? Such a clear, warm, captivating voice, so familiar. His call certainly carried weight, even the news editor noticed. Late Night Confessions is on the verge of becoming a sensation after just one night. Could it be a misunderstanding? Many people have similar voices. He's a public figure, he wouldn't leave himself vulnerable. Isn't the first and most fundamental requirement of a news editor to be absolutely scandal-free, let alone immune to gossip? The station issued a denial. David Lawrence smiled cryptically. Aren't you two former classmates? She turned away, pretending to study a landscape painting on the wall. Yes, but we haven't been in touch for years. Her ears warmed involuntarily, she truly wasn't good at lying. David Lawrence's lips curled into a thoughtful smile. Well, you should go prepare. The show is about to air. She entered the studio, little Vicky sneaking in after her. Sister Hayes, tell me, was that man really Edward Smith? She sighed wearily at little Vicky. Do you hope he was, or wasn't? Of course I hope it was him. I even wrote down his number. It ends in 9/11, like the date of the Twin Towers attack, so I remembered it instantly. Little Vicky pulled a small piece of paper from a drawer. She snatched the paper, crumpled it without looking, and tossed it in the trash. If Director Lawrence finds out about this, you can pack your bags, go home, and start a career in street sweeping. Little Vicky stuck out her tongue, her lips twisting into a wry smile. That night, little Vicky answered calls until her hand ached and her voice grew hoarse. She, however, felt quite at ease. Most listeners simply wanted a sympathetic ear, not life advice. In this aspect, she seemed to excel. Late into the night, with the wind still sighing outside the window, she reached out and turned on the lamp, watching her elongated shadow stretch across the sofa and onto the wall. On the other side of the wall, Edward Smith, how are you feeling today? Are you calm? If that phone call really was from you, of course, it definitely wouldn't be because of you. You didn't even know I was back in the country. It was just a coincidence. Who is the girl that fills your heart with sorrow? She laughed and patted her forehead as if to push those thoughts out of her head. It was already 2 a.m. Shouldn't she be worried about sleeping instead of concerning herself with this? Such sensitive nerves. When she opened her eyes again, it was 11 a.m. The wind had stopped, and the sunlight wasn't bad. Looking up, the Beijing sky revealed a blue she hadn't seen in a long time. It reminded her of the Auckland sky, blue like this all year round. She really missed the natural feeling of Auckland, even though she often cried loudly at night from homesickness back then. Having been back in Beijing for just over a month, she already felt suffocated. Perhaps she shouldn't have returned to Beijing. At this time, Edward Smith was also at home. He didn't come knocking on her door, and she didn't deliberately go over to greet him. They weren't exactly close friends in class, and they didn't have much to chat about. Besides, he was an editor, so he must be very busy. Combining breakfast and lunch into one meal, she sat down to eat, habitually turning on the TV for company. Looking at the screen, at the man being interviewed by the beautiful MC, she chuckled. She didn't know what he looked like when he was working as an editor, but as an interviewee, he seemed a bit defensive, not accepting the MC's intensely enthusiastic gaze. The beauty would ask a question, he would answer, simply and clearly blocking the crucial points, otherwise just shaking or nodding his head. Most of the time, he just smiled serenely, as if he were just sitting in a chair in front of a camera, nothing important at all. Fortunately, the beautiful woman was well prepared, constantly exuding charm, attracting the audience. Everything in the world is like this. If you succeed, a little effort from before can also emit a brilliant glow. If you fail, even great efforts are just like a flickering light in the night. Who can it warm? He did odd jobs at the TV station, working as a reporter, editor, and field editor. Once, a typhoon landed in Haining City, Zhejiang Province. Amidst the fierce wind and rain, he tied a rope around his waist, stood in front of the camera, wiped the rainwater off his face, raised the microphone, but right after that, he disappeared from the screen. At that moment, were you afraid? The beauty asked. He nodded. Afraid, of course. During the 2 days you were missing, everyone thought of the possibility that you were no longer alive, but you brought back a miracle. At the moment you were rescued, what did you think? This question seemed very difficult. He pondered for a long time before replying, "It's good to be alive." A burst of cheerful laughter erupted from the filming scene. The beauty seemed irritated by his answer, her smile no longer sweet. However, many people say you turned misfortune into blessing. You are currently the youngest news editor at the station. Her tone was not without sarcasm. Are you encouraging us to go on an adventure together by saying that? He responded with unusual enthusiasm. No, not at all. The beauty waved her hands repeatedly. All right, Editor Smith, let me ask you one more question. Your friend revealed that being an editor wasn't your original intention, but you chose this path because of someone, a girl. Is this true? The scene instantly fell silent, even breaths sounded like thunder. He smiled gently. As long as I don't plan to live alone, I'll want to share everything I have with someone else. Seeing the bottom of her rice bowl, she gathered the dishes and took them to the kitchen to wash. At 4 p.m., she heard Edward Smith's door close as he went out. At 11 p.m., as she was changing clothes to go to the radio station, she heard his footsteps outside her door. At 2 a.m., clutching her coat, she walked towards the elevator. Turning back, she saw the door of the opposite apartment tightly shut, with no light seeping out. He must be asleep. For the next 2 days, just like before, they didn't run into each other at the elevator. She'd been gone for 6 years, everything was outdated. The names of stars, bands, they all sounded unfamiliar. Justin Trent, she was somewhat familiar with. Closing the door to the live broadcast room, sitting in front of the mixing console, putting on her headphones, she no longer felt nervous, but rather a sense of familiarity. You came to my city, walked the streets I walked, thought about the days without you, how lonely I was. Maybe I'll suddenly appear at the corner cafe, you'll greet me with a smile and sit down to chat, see how I've changed, won't mention the past, just want to say, long time no see. I don't know why, but these lyrics make me a little melancholic. Every day in this world, scenes of parting and reunion play out, with laughter and tears. I'm just an ordinary person, so I dare not comment too much on how well Eason sings. As for him, I've heard some interesting gossip. Hillary, his wife, loves to shop, people say she's extravagant. Eason declared loudly, I work so hard to earn money, if not for her to spend, then who? It's truly heartwarming and touching. This sentence might carry more weight than 100 I love yous. No wonder girls everywhere don't love roses or lilies the most, but the promise of spend whatever you want from their husbands. Enough rambling, let's welcome our first caller of the night. Before taking the last call, Phoebe Hayes put on some music and took a quick sip of water. Lifting her eyes, she saw little Vicky holding a phone outside the glass partition, waving and frowning. She deciphered little Vicky's lip movements, alluring voice. Holding a mouthful of water, she swallowed slowly after a long moment. She nodded to little Vicky. Phoebe T. Hayes, good evening. Good evening, sir. You must be an old friend of the show. Indeed. Back then, you caused quite a stir online for our program. Has anyone told you your voice strongly resembles a famous editor's? It's my honor. Actually, I frequently encounter such misunderstandings. it's quite complicated. Does it affect your life? Not really. He paused briefly. I am simply myself. Well then, do you have anything you'd like to share with everyone tonight? I saw her again. Your married classmate? He chuckled. I was mistaken, she isn't married after all. So, will you confess your feelings to her? Being able to see her regularly is already wonderful. As for confessing, not for now. I don't know if she currently feels the same way I do. If she doesn't, will you remain silent as before? She will, he stated with absolute certainty. Huh. Because she has returned. Chapter 9, Class Reunion. Stepping off the bus, she looked up at the star-filled sky. The cold night wind swept across her slender frame. Roses bloomed by someone's window, their fragrance carried by the breeze, softening the darkness. She seemed to be the last one back to the neighborhood. Hearing footsteps, the security guard glanced up from his television, gave her a once-over, then returned to his screen. She wasn't afraid, but hearing her own footsteps and seeing her shadow lengthen and shorten evoked a sense of loneliness. As the elevator doors opened, she noticed the hallway was unusually bright. Edward Smith's apartment door was ajar, the living room lights spilling out. It seemed impolite not to at least offer a greeting. Quickening her pace, she fumbled for her keys. Her bag tumbled to the floor with a thud. As she straightened up, Edward Smith stood before her, shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows, his trousers a crisp line from waist to ankle. Phoebe Hayes, could you help me with something? His gaze, clear as glass, reflected her flustered expression. What is it? Come inside, let's talk. He stepped aside, gesturing her in. Because she has returned. Is it very urgent? Not urgent, maybe within a month. Then it's no problem, I'll let you know when I'm done translating. She took the disc and stood up. Let me give you my phone number. He returned to the bookshelf to get his mobile phone. What's your number? She bit her lip and recited a string of numbers. He looked at her and dialed the number. She opened her mobile phone and looked at the constantly flashing number on the screen, 11 messy numbers, without any pattern. Even if she tried to remember them, she basically couldn't.